Recently, I took a look at the last 6 years of GeForce 60 class GPUs to see the progress Nvidia has made, or at least what they'd offered budget gamers over the years leading up to the RTX 5060. And in short, the RTX 5060 is their most impressive offering since the RTX 2060 back in early 2019, which is both good and bad. It's good that we finally have an RTX 5060 that really moves performance on, but unfortunately it does so with a fairly significant limitation. With just 8GB of VRAM, it is difficult to recommend in 2025 for $300 US, but as I noted in that video, with virtually no competition from AMD, it's unsurprising we've ended up where we have. And on that note, it's time to see what Radeon has delivered over the past 5.5 years. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by ASUS and their new Tough Gaming B850 Plus Wi-Fi motherboard, designed to fully support the latest AMD Ryzen 9000 series processors. Armed with 14 80-amp power stages just for the V-Core, it can tackle even the Ryzen 9 9950X with ease, and I verified the board to work flawlessly with DDR5 8000 memory. You're also getting ultra-fast Wi-Fi 7 with ASUS Q antenna, 2.5GB Ethernet, pre-installed I/O shield, 20GB per second USB, PCIe 5.0 for the graphics card with Q release, while the primary M.2 also supports PCIe 5.0 with Q latch. There's loads more features, so to check out the ASUS Tough Gaming B850 Plus Wi-Fi, please click the link in the video description. Okay, so the Radeon RX 5600 XT. This was released back in 2020 for an MSRP of $280 US, and while not amazing for that price, I thought it was decent enough, and I concluded by saying this. The Radeon RX 5600 XT is a respectable product that is pushed for lower prices and better performance at $300 US. For that alone, we commend it. The GPU won't blow your socks off, and yet it's better value than the Radeon RX 5700 and makes the RTX 2060 Super a really tough buy. Given the competition in this price range, we think AMD has done fine. Then, the following year, we got the Radeon RX 6600 for $330 US, and in short, this one was a complete stinker. And I concluded the review by saying, going back to the Radeon RX 6600's performance, sure, in a normal market, there's no denying this product would suck. $330 would be a bad joke. It's a 20% price hike over the 20-month-old 5600 XT for a 6% performance increase at 1440p. Bottom line, the Radeon RX 6600 is just like the 6600 XT, an uninspiring product made palatable only by the current climate. Now look, the RX 6600 did eventually become a successful product for AMD, and this was entirely down to the fact that once the cryptocurrency mining boom cooled off, AMD completely dumped the pricing, and this saw some cards retail for below $200 US. And that's an over 40% discount when compared to the release price. At that price, the RX 6600 was a great value product and well worth recommending. Then in mid-2023, we got the RX 7600 for $270 US after a last-minute price adjustment from AMD down from $300 US, which would have been an even larger disaster. Anyway, my conclusion for this one was, we cannot recommend purchasing the Radeon RX 7600 at the launch price of $270. It simply doesn't do enough to warrant that asking price, especially when the same gaming experience could have been purchased for around the same cost as far back as late last year. All of that brings us to the Radeon RX 9060 XT, of which there are two versions, a good one and a not so good one, a bad one in fact, and you guessed it, we are looking at the bad one, the 8GB model, which slots in at $300 US. And that's the price point AMD has historically targeted with these products. That said though, we do recommend spending an extra $50 US to get the 16GB model, as it is significantly more capable and will last you much longer. The 8GB 9060 XT also goes head-to-head with the $300 GeForce RTX 5060, so it'd be unfair to use the 16GB model. So sorry, but not sorry to the AMD fans. So all of that said, today we're comparing the 5600 XT, RX 6600, RX 7600, and 9060 XT 8GB head-to-head at 1080p and 1440p using two different quality presets per game to get a good idea of where things stand now. So, let's get into the results. First up, we have Rainbow Six Siege using the medium preset, and here we have a wide spread of results. Firstly, you can see why the RX 6600 was so underwhelming when first released. In this example, it's only roughly matching the performance of the older 5600 XT. The RX 6600 was so bad, in fact, that it makes the RX 7600 look good in comparison, as that newer model delivered 33 to 35% more performance in this example. But what about the 9060 XT 8GB? Here we see a 58% performance improvement over the RX 7600 at both tester resolutions. And this kind of generational uplift would usually have us jumping for joy. But with just 8GB of VRAM, it is hard to get too excited given the issues this product already faces. And we only expect those issues to worsen in the coming years. Still, in this example, the 9060 XT 8GB blows away the RX 7600 and is the most impressive $300 US product AMD has released in at least half a decade. Using the Ultra Plus preset, we find a similar story. The RX 6600 is roughly on par with the 5600 XT, offering gamers absolutely nothing at this price point, and in fact, it even manages to regress. So if we skip the RX 6600, the RX 7600 ends up being 26 to 29% faster than the 5600 XT, which seems impressive, but also remember the 7600 was released 3 years later. Once again, the 9060 XT 8GB looks mighty impressive when compared to the RX 7600, delivering an incredible 62% performance increase at 1080p and 49% at 1440p. At a guess, I'd say the reason why the 9060 XT doesn't scale as well at 1440p when compared to what was seen at 1080p is due to the fact that it doesn't have a great deal more memory bandwidth, just an 11% increase. Next up, we have Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered using the medium preset, and here scaling is a little more even when compared to what we just saw when testing with Rainbow Six Siege. The RX 6600 was 8 to 14% faster than the 5600 XT, which is obviously still a very disappointing improvement. Then we have the RX 7600, which was 20 to 23% faster than the RX 6600, so a decent gain there, but given how underwhelming the 6600 was, it's hard to get too excited. And that brings us to the 9060 XT 8GB, which was a massive 50 to 57% faster than the RX 7600, a massive generational uplift and considerably larger than anything Radeon has been able to deliver over the past few generations. Now these results were rather unexpected, but I can explain what's going on here, and it's all to do with the VRAM and PCIe bandwidth. Firstly, this game requires more than 8GB of VRAM when using the very high preset, even at 1080p, where usage is regularly over 11GB. And that being the case, you might be wondering why the 9060 XT 8GB is performing so well. And the reason is two things. Firstly, whereas the other GPUs are limited to PCIe 4.0, the 9060 XT adopts the 5.0 spec, and it does so with all 16 lanes available, affording it a total bandwidth of 128GB per second. The RX 6600 and 7600 in comparison are limited to a total bandwidth of just 32GB per second, 4 times less than that of the 9060 XT. The 5600 XT also uses PCIe 4.0, but all 16 lanes are available, boosting its total bandwidth to 64GB per second, but it has just 6GB of VRAM, so the results end up similar to that of the 6600 and 7600. What this means though, is that although the 9060 XT 8GB also runs out of VRAM in this test, it has enough bandwidth to help mitigate the performance loss. There will be still a performance loss when compared to the 16GB version, but it's a lot less than it would be if it was limited to say 6 PCIe lanes or used an older 4.0 spec. That said, keep in mind, if you were to use the 9060 XT in a PCIe 3.0 system, it would end up just as slow as the RX 6600 and 7600, and therefore would suffer the same horrible frame time performance. Next up, we have Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 using the medium preset, and we're seeing a similar trend here where the RX 6600 offers a reasonable performance uplift over the 5600 XT at 1080p, 19% in this example, but then almost nothing at 1440p, just a 6% uplift. As a result, the RX 7600 was 28 to 31% faster than the RX 6600. Then we have the new 9060 XT 8GB offering one of its weakest gains yet in the range of 34 to 39%, which is still a great generational uplift. It's just not as impressive as previous examples. Then when retesting using the Ultra preset, we find the RX 6600 is 21% faster than the 5600 XT at 1080p, but then just 21% faster at 1440p. The RX 7600 was 26 to 32% faster than the 6600, and then the 9060 XT 8GB was just 40 to 44% faster than the RX 7600, which is a great improvement. For testing Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, we'll start with the low preset, and when using these low quality settings, the RX 6600 was 20 to 25% faster than the 5600 XT, while the RX 7600 was just 14% faster than the 6600 at 1080p and then 23% faster at 1440p. But all of those gains pale in comparison when compared to what the 9060 XT 8GB offered over the RX 7600, delivering 61 to 64% more performance. Now, switching to the high preset heavily reduced the RX 6600's gains over the 5600 XT. Here it was just 12% faster at 1080p and then just 6% faster at 1440p. In comparison, the RX 7600 was 30% faster than the 6600 at 1080p and a massive 43% faster at 1440p. The high quality settings also reduced the 9060 XT's margins over the RX 7600 down to the 45 to 50% range, which is obviously still a very significant increase. Moving on to Space Marine 2, we'll start with the medium data. Here the RX 6600 was 28% faster than the 5600 XT at 1080p and 13% faster at 1440p. Then we have the RX 7600 delivering 31 to 36% more performance than the 6600, while the 9060 XT 8GB was 31 to 37% faster than the 7600. So we're looking at much more consistent performance gains here for the past few generations. Now, using the Ultra preset with the 4K texture pack requires a lot more than 8GB of VRAM to render the game correctly, though I did notice that almost all of the textures did load correctly using the 9060 XT 8GB, and I suspect this is due to the PCIe 5.0x16 interface and the fact that I'm using a PCIe 5.0 compliant system. The big problems are seen when trying to run the 5600 XT at 1440p, as missing textures are the least of our worries. As a result, the RX 6600 was 19% faster at 1080p, but a massive 50% faster at 1440p. Even when upgrading to the RX 7600, it was 31 to 33% faster than the 6600, and certainly very usable at 1080p. Finally, the 9060 XT 8GB was 38% faster than the 7600 at 1080p, and a massive 49% faster at 1440p, again likely due to the additional PCIe bandwidth. Shadow of the Tomb Raider has been included to give us a look at how these various GPUs scale in an older title that predates their release, as this one came out in late 2018. The results using the medium preset, or rather the scaling, looks pretty typical. For example, the RX 6600 was 20% faster than the 5600 XT at 1080p, but then just 13% faster at 1440p. Then we see a much tighter 21 to 23% range for the RX 7600 over the 6600. Finally, the 9060 XT 8GB was 29 to 32% faster than the RX 7600. Now, switching to the highest preset, the RX 6600 was 16 to 23% faster than the 5600 XT, while the RX 7600 was 22 to 25% faster than the 6600. Then we have the 9060 XT 8GB, which was 28 to 32% faster than the RX 7600, so another solid generational uplift there. Finally, we have Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and we'll start with the basic preset. Here the RX 6600 was 23 to 26% faster than the 5600 XT. Then we have the RX 7600, which was 32 to 35% faster than the 6600, followed by the most recent release, the 9060 XT 8GB, which was 35% faster than the 7600 at 1080p and then 44% faster at 1440p. Then, with the Extreme preset enabled, we find some interesting results. The 5600 XT does run out of VRAM at 1440p, so whereas the RX 6600 was just 6% faster at 1080p, it ended up being 112% faster at 1440p. Even so, the RX 7600 smashes the 6600 in this test, delivering 65% greater performance at 1080p and 56% at 1440p. And yet despite that, there was still room for the 9060 XT 8GB to deliver 36% more performance at 1080p and 41% more at 1440p. Okay, so here's a look at the 7-game average using the low to medium presets. At 1080p, the RX 6600 was on average 18% faster than the 5600 XT, and then just 12% faster at 1440p. So not exactly amazing gains there. In a vacuum where just Radeon GPUs exist, the RX 7600 was a much more impressive release, delivering 26 to 29% greater performance than the RX 6600. This makes the 42 to 47% increase the 9060 XT 8GB offers over the 7600 look mighty impressive, and in a way it is. Now, when using the higher quality presets, the RX 6600 ended up delivering just 11% more performance than the 5600 XT at 1080p. That said, the margin did balloon out to 21% at 1440p, as there were a number of instances where the 5600 XT ran out of VRAM. Then we have the RX 7600, which was 29 to 34% faster than the 6600, winning out a little bit more at 1440p. The 9060 XT 8GB was 31% faster than the 7600 at 1080p, but also 49% faster at 1440p, so a strong uplift there. Now here's a look at how these models compare in terms of cost per frame based on the MSRP. What will probably jump at you the most here is just how bad the RX 6600 was upon release. Sure, it was released during a cryptocurrency mining boom, but still at 1080p, it was worse value for gamers than the previous generation 5600 XT. And that meant the RX 7600 was almost 40% better value. So that actually makes the value of the 9060 XT look quite weak at a 25% improvement from the RX 7600. But let's adjust these numbers for US inflation. Now, adjusted for inflation, the RX 6600 ends up being just 7% better value than the 5600 XT at 1440p, while it was actually slightly worse value at 1080p. But because the RX 7600 was $60 US cheaper than the 6600 based on the MSRP, despite lackluster performance, it ends up offering considerably better value, 46% better at 1440p and 44% at 1080p. And then because the 9060 XT 8GB price jumps back up to $300, it ended up being just shy of 30% better value than the RX 7600. So, although the 9060 XT is the biggest leap forward of the past few generations in terms of performance, it was actually the RX 7600 that offered the most value compared to its predecessor, but it is a skewed comparison given how grossly overpriced the RX 6600 was due to the market conditions at the time. Now, you might think of the RX 6600 as an amazingly good value budget graphics card, and that's because for the majority of its life it actually was. As noted earlier, it eventually ended up at $200 US, or sometimes a bit below that, and at that price, Nvidia refused to compete with it, making the RX 6600 the go-to for many, and in this graph you can see why. At $200 US, it matched the value of the RX 7600, and that's a product that never sold for less than $250 US. So with plenty of availability, it was easy to snap up an RX 6600 for $200 or less, and because of that, many did. Now moving on to the 9060 XT 8GB, it runs into the same issues as the RTX 5060. It only has 8GB of VRAM, which while perfectly fine for the vast majority of games, and even when it is a problem, you can lower the quality settings as shown in Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. And I do think for very entry-level budget GPUs, this kind of compromise is somewhat acceptable. However, while the RTX 5060 and 9060 XT 8GB might be considered entry-level, $300 US is still quite a lot of money, and at this price point they really should have more VRAM than consoles that are now 5 years old. And that makes these older consoles arguably much better value than PC gaming. And frankly, I can't believe that's something I would ever say. There's also the concern that while you can fairly easily tune quality settings to enable games to run on 8GB GPUs without any issues, we're talking about brand new products here, released in 2025. So buying now in the hope that you'll be able to enjoy your purchase for years to come It's pretty sketchy, and I do shudder to think just how broken 8GB GPUs are going to be in 3 to 4 years from now. It's for this reason that I'm hesitant to recommend any graphics product with just 8GB of VRAM, unless it's extremely cheap, which these GPUs aren't. Also, for just an additional 17% more money, you can get the 16GB version of the 9060 XT, and this is what just about everyone considering an RTX 5060 or 8GB 9060 XT should do. On that note, please don't take this content as a review of the 8GB 9060 XT. It is not that at all. Rather, it's a look at what AMD's offered over the years for $300, or roughly that amount of money, give or take $30 US. I did see in the comments of my previous GeForce 60 series video, mostly on Reddit to be honest, where some people were claiming my video had the opposite effect of what it was supposedly trying to do, which they claimed was to make Nvidia and the RTX 5060 look bad. But the goal of that content was quite clearly neither of those things. Rather, the intention was to look at the progress Nvidia had made across 4 generations at the $300-ish price point, and it did just that. Also, as I said in my initial review, the RTX 5060 is a surprisingly powerful product that is sadly let down by the 8GB VRAM capacity, and I have the exact same opinion of the 8GB 9060 XT. So it's a very bad idea to look at this sort of content as buying advice. It's not a review, and really that much should be clear. This content doesn't fully analyze the weaknesses of the GPUs tested, and it doesn't look at competing parts. And in a similar vein, I'm sure there'll be people that are going to look at this data and claim something like, see, the 8GB 9060 XT is fine. In fact, it's a really good value product. But we already know this isn't the case. For a small price premium, the 16GB version is considerably more capable, and I'm willing to bet just about anything that within a 3 to 4 year time frame, it'll prove to be a far better investment. And look, I've already done loads of testing showing where the 8GB 9060 XT falls apart, but those configurations aren't terribly useful for this type of comparison, as it would just cripple everything. And we would have found much the same with the GeForce 60 series testing, the RTX 3060 being the only exception there. Wrapping up this content, the Radeon RX 9060 XT 8GB looks to be one of the very best products that AMD has released for $300 US. And despite costing a little more than the RX 7600, it still offers over 20% better value. And in terms of raw performance, it's by far the biggest leap we've seen in at least half a decade. But as is the case with the RTX 5060, the only thing stopping us from going all in on this model is, of course, the 8GB VRAM capacity. At $300 or more, it's a deal breaker for us. But of course, let me know what you think about the 8GB 9060 XT in the comments below. Am I being too hard on this thing? I don't know. I'll wait to hear from you guys on that one, but really I do think spending $50 more on the 16GB model makes the most sense. I know it's more expensive again, but it's an investment you're going to be making, I would think, for at least a 4-year period. So I think a additional $50 over a 4-year period isn't too bad to get a model that has much better capabilities and should still be usable in 4 years from now. Anyway, like I said, that is going to do it for this one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this look back at the Radeon series, and we'll have some more updates. I know you guys wanted to see a GeForce 70 class comparison, like the 60 class comparison, so I'm working on that as well, along with some other content. Anyway, if you'd like to support the work we do here at Hardware Unboxed, we have the join button or Patreon. Signing up to either one of those will give you access to monthly live streams, a Discord server, behind the scenes content, and Q&A stuff. So check that out if you're interested. But if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.